Hi guys, Dale here, back with another video in my new list that is focused on documenting my journey toward anti-racism. For those that don't know me, I'm Sadell. I usually talk about marketing, debt and finance, and positivity. But I've added a new channel based on the events of the past couple of months, focused on how I will start to not only feel and be more anti-racist, but how I will go about documenting that and how you can also be more anti-racist. I think this video is going to be a part of a mini series inside of that series around a book I read called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This is definitely going to be part one of that video just because there's going to be a lot to talk about. And I think that I'm going to make it part one of 4. So the way the book breaks up is there is the first few chapters, which is about, generally speaking, defining the term racism and defining anti-racism. That is chapters 1 and 2. I'm calling chapters 3 through 11 one next section, and that is going to focus on how race looks from his vantage point, so particularly being Black in America. The next sections, chapters 12 through 15, go through the intersectionality aspects of race, so thinking about race and gender, race and sexuality, which are not the same, race and class, and then race and space. And the last section are just his final words. So he talks about his failures, his successes, and how to survive in a world as an anti-racist. So this is section 1, where we're talking about the definitions of racism and anti-racism. Ibram X. Kendi takes a pretty hard line in this world where he talks about racism and anti-racism and really brings up racism and anti-racism as a binary choice. You can either be racist or anti-racist. Being not racist is just another form of being racist in his words. But it's important to think about racism as not pejorative, but a descriptive term. What I mean is the reason he views racist and anti-racist as a binary and not necessarily to be good and bad is that he views racism as a description of a group of people that express racist views, but also are supportive of racist views through action or inaction. Meaning that you can be racist in his eyes purely by not working in an anti-racist fashion. I thought this was interesting for a couple of reasons. First, if you think about books in general, books are allowed to live in an ideal state, in an optimal state. And I think in some cases, a lot of the things he's bringing up are ideal in fashion, meaning the idea that you can't be not racist without being also racist is an interesting theory, and I think it works in a lot of ways, but it also doesn't work in a lot of ways. I think it is possible to be not racist and not actually racist. And I can talk about that in a later video. Shoot me a comment if you're interested in that viewpoint, but I want to stop there for time's sake to say that I think part of the way that this book hits you needs to understand that he is coming from an academic perspective, from a literary perspective, from somewhat of a theoretical perspective, and I think how it plays out in the real world may not be as binary as he might suggest in his book. The other thing I find interesting about this idea is I think, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think the idea of intent is something that he might be implying in this book and doesn't say outright. Meaning, you can't be intentionally not racist. I think that that's right. And I think he says it in the book in the early chapters, but I think that that is true. I think if you see something that is racist or anti-racist, or if you see something in general that can have racial undertones, your response to that is most likely going to be racist or anti-racist in his definition. It doesn't mean that when you say something that feels racist that you are by definition racist, but it does mean that your response to certain situations generally falls into racist or anti-racist. So a lot is happening right now when we think about protests, for example. your views about the protesters are most likely going to fall in those two camps. Meaning, if you're focusing so much on looting and not the reasons for looting, I think you can come off as someone that's okay with the reason for protesting, but not the protests, which means, you fall into more of a racist camp. I think the opposite can be true. I think if you understand the looting for the reasons that people are protesting, you don't have to believe that looting is right. But I do think having a heart for anti-racism can give you an understanding and empathy for people that may be taking a more violent or aggressive turn in their protests. July 4th also just passed, and I think that that's another area where I think you see a bit of a diversion between racism and anti-racism. Again, not to say if you are upset with people that are negative toward July 4th, or you are viewing people that are adding negativity to the day, that you're absolutely racist. But I do think in order to be fully anti-racist, you have to understand where people are coming from. And I totally understand the idea that July 4th, 1776 was a time where lots of things were happening for a small group of people, and a lot of things were happening in a negative fashion towards a lot of people, particularly minority groups, and all of them, women, Black people, Native Americans, a lot of different racial groups. And so to not be able to empathize with that group of people, I think pushes you towards an idea that is racist, meaning it allows you to be okay with the systems that are in place right now. And I think that in order to truly be anti-racist, you do need to have that level of empathy and to be able to understand why July 4th might not be the most amazing, most freedom-flowing day that a lot of people might think it is. The last two things I'll bring up are my interpretations of some of the things he says toward the end of chapter 1 and some in chapter 2 as well. And I want to be clear, these are my interpretations, so I don't want you to believe I'm saying what he's saying. But I think there are two important things as we get through this book that are important to note. The first is around race neutrality, and the second is around the differences between equity and equality. In terms of race neutrality, I do agree with him that being race neutral, not seeing race, not caring if you're black, white, or purple, being, able to just love everybody no matter what, the dangers of that are real. I don't believe race neutral means you're racist, but I do think being completely blind to race, colorblind, is dangerous because it does allow you to believe things like affirmative action can be racist. Things like being discriminated against because you aren't a person of color, or because you aren't a woman, or because you aren't a part of a minority group is reverse racism. I think those things are bad, and I think that being race neutral or race agnostic tends to put you in those camps. All of that said, I don't know that race neutrality is inherently discriminatory. I don't believe that if you are colorblind, you're racist. I just think it's something to think about, especially for people who believe that they are not racist because they love everybody. All lives matter is a race neutral sort of thing. Obviously, there are some people that use all lives matter because they're also racist and they may be espousing racist views. But I think the ideal of all lives matter is race neutral, which is dangerous because it ignores people who actually need to be heard, meaning folks in Black Lives Matter, folks in Trans Lives Matter, women, Native Americans, things like that. When we think about just all lives matter, it's an okay statement, but it has undertones that can promote or at least allow racist ideals because of the difference between equality and equity. Equality is across the board, people being treated fairly, people being treated totally equally, meaning if a scholarship was given to 3 people, everybody got a third. A third of this group got a third, this group got a third, this group got a third, everyone got the same thing. Unfortunately, in cases where equity is more important than equality, that means that people who are already behind are essentially still behind. They're just, everybody has moved up by whatever measure that equality boost gave them. I would offer the example that goes around a lot. There's a meme of people standing on boxes, and you can see that, you know, one person's taller than the others. And so equality means everyone gets the same box to stand on, meaning the taller person now has even more of an advantage because he was already taller. And the shorter person gets a boost, but they still can't see over the fence because they were never tall enough to begin with, and that box did not compensate for their lack of height. Equity is when everyone gets a box that allows them to see over the fence, meaning, yes, the shorter person gets a bigger box than the taller person, but that's okay because the taller person didn't need as much of the box to begin with. I'll go ahead and link that image below, and maybe I'll cut it in as well into this video so that you can see what I'm talking about. In this, Dr. Ibram brings up the idea that discrimination is actually okay and it's a good thing in causes and places where you need equity and you're trying to bring about equity. And while discrimination feels like a bad word, I don't disagree with that point. I think that if you are a disadvantaged population, the only way for you to become equal is to have more of an advantage than those who have an advantage already so that you can balance the scales. I think the same thing with pay equity in women is a very good version of equity. You have to allow women to have the opportunity to catch up. And so that's why pay equity is more important than pay equality, meaning don't give everybody a raise because you're trying to balance the scales, because that means everybody's in the same place. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, please put a comment below and I can get back to it. I think that's enough. This video is getting a little bit longer than I want it to be. I want to try to keep every video around 10 minutes or so. So that's where we are for today. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that encourages you to go get the book. I'll link the book in all of the videos so that you have the opportunity to get it. And don't just listen to my summary, but actually read it for yourself. Otherwise, the next video I'll talk about is the ideas of race in America. These are chapters 3 through 11. And so we'll engage a little bit on that and some of my feelings about the ideas that he posits in that video. Until then, I'll see you at the next video.